The United States launches airstrikes in Libya in the fight against ISIL. With this latest military strategy, is the U.S. finding itself in a cycle of war? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The newest air campaign in Libya is the latest in a long line of U.S. military actions around the world, from Syria to Iraq and now Libya. The U.S. claims it's using its military might to support stability, but critics worry it's just creating more conflict and instability. Here to recap a timeline of American involvement in the region, CCTV's Roy Ruttenberg has this report.
Just days after the attacks of 9/11, the U.S. Congress approved President George Bush's use of, quote, all necessary and appropriate force against those who planned, authorized, committed, or aided the attacks. The 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, or AUMF, would go on to serve as Washington's legal defense for military action in a number of countries. First, Afghanistan, invaded in late 2001 in partnership with the UK. The goal there, Washington said, was to get Osama bin Laden and to expel his group, Al-Qaeda. But a year later, the U.S. was focused elsewhere. CIA predators launched Hellfire missiles to strike Al-Qaeda's offshoot in Yemen. The Bush administration said Yemen's leaders approved and cooperated, and the White House cited the same AUMF. In March 2003, after getting a separate authorization from Congress, the U.S. invaded Iraq. Bush referred to it, quote, as the central front in the war on terror. A year later, the U.S. began using drones in Pakistan, it said, to target al-Qaeda militants who had found a safe haven there. And towards the end of his term, Bush would authorize drone strikes in Somalia against an East African al-Qaeda cell. Bush would leave office in early 2009 with 2 unfinished wars on his desk, and his successor, Barack Obama, would inherit both. Within 2 years, Obama himself was authorizing U.S. airstrikes on Libya as part of an international effort to impose a UN-mandated no-fly zone over the country. The goal, Washington said, was to weaken and ultimately remove Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Months later, Obama was withdrawing troops from Iraq. By the end of 2011, a decade after 9/11, the last American soldiers were leaving. The U.S. war there was over, at least in theory. Fast forward to the end of Obama's presidency, and nearly 5,000 U.S. troops are back in Iraq, and American generals are asking Obama to send more. This after instability in Iraq gave way to ISIL, originally known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The group gained major ground there and in neighboring Syria. The U.S. is now striking both countries from the air as part of an international coalition. The Obama administration said it's legally covered under Bush-era authorizations. Obama tried unsuccessfully to get his own. Meanwhile, the U.S. is supporting Saudi-led airstrikes on Yemen, targeting anti-government Houthi rebels. Ironically, the power vacuum has led to a surge in al-Qaeda's presence in Yemen, so the U.S., with advisors on the ground, is providing support to Arab forces there fighting the group. Under Obama, the U.S. has also intensified its strikes on Somalia. And this month, Obama once more authorized, quote, limited airstrikes on Libya in support of its fledgling government's fight against ISIL. Obama said it's in the interest of U.S. national security.
Obama's second term will end in January. The leading contenders to replace him have both promised a reset on Syria, suggesting a possible expansion of war there, too. Roy Ruttenberg, CCTV in Washington.
Joining us now to discuss the U.S. war policy in the Middle East, William Binney is a former U.S. National Security Agency cryptologist and a whistleblower against the NSA data collection policies. From New Jersey via Skype, Bill Roggio is a senior fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a former U.S. Army soldier. And Hussein Ibish is a senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's go to Bill Roggio. Bill, so the United States has resumed bombings against what it says are ISIL targets. The Pentagon says that it is undertaking these attacks at the request of the United Nations-backed government in Libya. But when you look at the way these attacks are carried out and what's going on, do you see any evidence of a well-thought-out game plan here, a strategy? What is the aim of this?
What I see is an expanding jihadist threat. You know, I always mention this. Prior to 9/11, Al-Qaeda had a base inside Afghanistan and then operated on a cellular level within several countries in the Caucasus and in areas in Africa, Yemen, and whatnot. Today, Al-Qaeda and its offshoot, the Islamic State, are waging insurgencies in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Somalia, Syria, Yemen. You know, I could go on and on with the places. And so what we're seeing, the reason these strikes are occurring is because the overall policy is failing. The U.S. and its allies have failed to address the real root cause of the problem, which is a virulent, radical strain of Islam that has embedded itself and it's attracting a small but significant enough number of Muslims to join its cause and to wage jihad against the West. And until that's dealt with, what the U.S. is left doing is conducting military strikes against a group, and in my opinion, it's doing it improperly because all it's doing is trying to target leadership and key nodes. But these groups are far larger than that. That's why these strikes, while they may be, we've been launching airstrikes in Somalia since 2006. Yet Shabaab still, Al-Qaeda's branch there, still controls territory. And again, I could give example after example. It's because there is no coherent strategy, and the strikes themselves is just a way of sort of keeping a lid on the problem.
William Binney, if we look at the strikes that are being carried out right now and the orders that were given by President Obama, I mean, there's been no debate here that we've heard. There's been no congressional approval for these strikes. Libya is now the fourth front in this war against ISIL. The United States has already been bombing targets in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. When President Obama sits down in the Oval Office and listens to the opinions of a wide range of people, looks at the options, what is he looking at and what is he choosing?
Well, it's really hard to tell. I mean, it doesn't look like he's putting together any kind of coherent strategy. Right. Certainly not pulling together the allies to organize an effort to attack these people and to at least try to return stability to these areas. I mean, after all, I mean, our military-industrial complex, I think, basically was the motive to go in and start these wars and to destabilize these countries. And once you do that, then you end up with all these conflicts from various factions in the countries. And he has no real, and never had, a game plan as to how to follow up any of these attacks that he started.
Hussein, Bill Roggio tells us that, there's a significant group, small but significant group of people who are following a radical Islamic ideology and carrying out these attacks. But should we go back one step beyond that and ask ourselves, how did this start in the first place? I mean, how did, for instance, ISIL get a foothold in Libya?
No, I think that's, well, you have to go even further than that. I mean, Libya is also a symptom. The weakness of the contemporary post-colonial Arab state is, sort of at the root cause of all of this. It's a radical failure of all of the other political strands in the Arab world and in other parts of the Islamic world leave the door open to this kind of radicalism. And it's precisely the failure of the states and all the other ideologies and a failure of societies to provide, sort of a vision that unites people behind any kind of coherent approach to making life better, that opens the door to this kind of extremism. So the problem really, I think, is 100 years in the making, and unfortunately will probably be 100 years in the resolving. And most of the work is local to the Arab and Muslim countries, but the international community and the United States does have an important role. I agree with both of both my other guests, my colleagues here, that there's nothing coherent on the table to address that.
Bill Roggio, if we look at the strikes right now, the United States, it says it wants to remove the threat, it wants to stabilize these countries. But let's take Libya as an example. There are, two other rival groups that claim to be the legitimate government of the country. If you look at the economy of the country, oil production is down to 20% since 2010. How does U.S. bombing stabilize the country?
It doesn't. I mean, look, the fact that the U.S. supported the overthrow of Gaddafi and without a plan immediately following up on how to stabilize the country. I mean, look, the bombing is not going to stabilize it. Its goal really is to tamp down the Islamic State, but the Islamic State isn't the only radical jihadist group operating there. You have Ansar al-Sharia, which is an al-Qaeda front group that's operating there, and other Islamist militias operating in Syria. But the United States is almost singularly focused on the Islamic State at this point, because I think that the president has made that a cornerstone of his strategy, is that we have to defeat the Islamic State, and they've claimed that groups like al-Qaeda are defeated. I just would like to point out one additional thing. It's not just Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Libya where the U.S. is conducting airstrikes. It's also Yemen and Pakistan. We have to remember the covert drone campaigns that are occurring there, and there's also support in other African countries as well.
Right.
There's covert activities there as well.
Bill is right that none of this is going to restore stability to Libya, and there isn't a plan or a policy to do that. And that's right. It's a piecemeal pushback against Islamic State in Libya as well as in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. But I think there is something to be said for some piecemeal policies, or at least piecemeal policies ought to be judged on their own terms. And in that sense, the initial intervention in Libya was designed to do one thing and one thing only: not to overthrow Gaddafi, not to create stability in Libya. It certainly didn't do that. There wasn't even an attempt to do it, and that might be part of the problem. But what it was designed to do was to forestall a massacre in Benghazi, and it did do that. So the one little goal that was claimed for it, it succeeded in doing. Now, that in itself might be an indictment of the overall approach, but I think in fairness one ought to say that.
But that doctrine is not used universally. I mean, look what's happening in Syria right now.
Right, absolutely. I mean, it is a question there's an opportunistic element here, and there's a huge division in the U.S. government about whether the approach to Syria has been a wise one or not, and most of the apparatus thinks it's been unwise because it's been too cautious and has left the field open to Russia and others to define the conflict to their liking, and I think they make a very strong case. On the other hand, there are many Americans, probably most, who fear the consequences of any deeper involvement.
William, President Obama must know that something is wrong, because a short while ago he told the U.S. cable television network Fox News that the greatest mistake he has made during his presidency was to intervene in Libya without any kind of post-bombing plan, some kind of post-attack strategy there. If that, by his own admission, was his biggest mistake, why is he doing it again?
That's really hard to tell. The only thing I can think of is because behind this, and President Eisenhower warned us about this in 1961 when he was leaving office, to be wary of the military-industrial complex and the undue influence of it. I mean, the wars generate money for the military-industrial complex, and that means they have a vested interest in having a war to make money. And President Obama doesn't seem to be opposing that. I mean, he's just falling for it like all others have done without coming up with a coherent plan as to how to get out of it or how to stabilize the world after they've done what they've done to begin with.
Well, from what you're telling me, is there a big question mark over who calls the shots?
Exactly.
I actually think Obama has been resistant to use of force, and I think he's come under a good deal of criticism for that, even from Hillary Clinton, and he sees himself as the man who stops wars rather than starts wars. Now, on the other hand, he's gone in wholeheartedly for the drone campaign, and he's gotten sucked into some of these other adventures, so that's true. But I think that under many other presidents, you would have seen probably more engagement than less, and I think it's hard to paint Obama as a warmongering president, frankly.
What do you think, Bill? Yes, go ahead.
However, he's probably engaged in more wars in more countries at one time. I don't believe he's a warmonger. I believe he wants to end these wars, but I think he's being slapped in the face with the reality. On the one hand, he has to assure the American public that he's preventing these radical jihadist groups from conducting attacks in the U.S. And on the other hand, you're watching these groups expand outward across the globe, and so he's forced to do so. I don't think this has anything to do with military-industrial complex. I mean, the military was supportive of getting out of Iraq. The military agreed to drawing down in Afghanistan and places. The military doesn't want to be engaged in these long-term wars. It's not in its interest. What we're watching here is just, it's a reaction to the growth, to the expansion of these jihadist groups.
But, Bill, if that is the case, if he's carrying out these piecemeal attacks in the way he is, then is it just a public relations exercise here for the benefit of the American public rather than to actually defeat the radicals?
No, I think that, look, I think he realizes that he will not win these wars. I think he's just trying to keep a lid on things. When you target these groups and you weaken them, you target their leadership, and you target their bomb-making capabilities and other nodes, it makes it real. They think more about survival, and they can't run training camps and things of that nature than they do about thinking about attacking the West. So it keeps them on the back foot, but it's not.
Oh, so sorry, Bill. I just wanted to say something in support of your basic claim, which is, if you look at the approach where there's one policy in Syria and one policy in Iraq, when in fact ISIL operates seamlessly in the areas it controls in Syria and Iraq, that kind of demonstrates, I think, that the effort ultimately is to contain that group rather than to destroy it. If there were an effort to really quash and destroy it, there would be a single united policy that targeted it in all the areas that it operates in a contiguous area across the border. There isn't one, and therefore we can only call this a policy of containment. So Bill's right.
Yeah, I describe it as piecemeal policy here.
Right,
We're
exactly.
trying it this way here, this way there, whatever works, whatever is politically acceptable within each country.
Yeah, that's right, I think.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break right now. Coming up, we look at the legacy of the U.S. intervention in the Middle East, plus how the next U.S. president changed policy in the region. Stay with us, you're watching The Heat. Welcome back. We're discussing the question, given the latest airstrikes in Libya, is the U.S. in a cycle of war? Still with us, William Binney is a former U.S. NSA whistleblower. Bill Roggio with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and Hussein Abish is a columnist, author, and scholar of Middle East affairs. Let's get back to the discussion. William, we know that wars make for strange bedfellows. Let's look at the war that's taking place in Yemen right now. It's being carried out largely by one of the closest allies of the United States, Saudi Arabia. But recently, the Washington Post had an article in which it said that Yemenis actually consider themselves to be at war with the United States, not with Saudi Arabia. The United States supplies huge amounts of weapons to Saudi Arabia. It also has one of the worst human rights records, also reported by the Washington Post. What is the point of the war in Yemen?
I really don't know. I can't tell. I mean, it just seems to be perpetually going on. I mean, the factions there are struggling to take power, that's all. And when you destabilize an area, you break factions up, and then they compete for power.
I can explain that war to you pretty quickly. Okay. It's a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is directly involved on the ground, pushing back against what they perceive as Iranian-backed rebels in exactly the reverse order as exists in Syria, where Iranian troops on the ground and Hezbollah troops are fighting against what they perceive to be Saudi, Turkish, and Qatari proxies. So you've got mirror image wars going on there. The ostensible reason is to reestablish the control of the internationally recognized legitimate government of Yemen, the Hadi government, and pursuant to a UN Security Council resolution. The problem is, of course, that a lot of people are getting killed in the process, including a lot of civilians and some children. The Houthis and their allies have behaved maybe even worse than the coalition, but they don't have an international address, whereas the Gulf states do, and they're more responsible. So,
but again, just like other places, I don't see any leadership trying to lead us out of this situation.
No, there isn't. In fact, it's interesting. I would argue that U.S. acquiescence to the Saudi and Emirati war in Yemen is kind of a quid pro quo for the Gulf states putting up with their dissatisfaction over U.S. policy in Syria, so that the U.S. kind of puts up with policies they don't agree with in Yemen and demands that the Gulf states go along with American policies in Syria, and everybody puts it aside. And so far, it's keeping the ball in the air. I'd say that's what's really going on in Yemen.
No, Hussein,
There's another part of this war, too, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula,
right, exactly,
which has controlled significant amount of territory in the south. That's the U.S. hook for this war,
right,
and it's a legitimate hook. AQAP is one of Al-Qaeda's most dangerous branches. It's a master bomb maker.
And in fact, now the UAE forces have given up the war against the Houthis and the Saleh group and are focusing on AQAP, and that's where the U.S. is getting dragged into the war in South Yemen, where it's not the Yemeni civil war, but this counterinsurgency program that is an endless quagmire for the Emiratis and the Americans, and it's turning into a very familiar scenario that we've been discussing this whole time.
But Hussein, is the aim of this war to determine who forms the legitimate government in Yemen, or...
Well, there's no debate about that. The Hadi government is the legitimate government.
Yeah, but, or is the war I'm talking about, or is it to establish which is the dominant power? If you say it's a proxy war.
Well, both. I mean, regionally, okay, so internally, there's no doubt about the legitimacy of the Hadi government. I mean, that's the UN. Nobody really, even the Iranians don't dispute it. They are secretly supporting an effort, a coup against it, but nobody really says Hadi isn't the legitimate government of Yemen. He's just not capable of ruling in most of the country. Yes, regionally, it's a power struggle between the Iranian-backed faction and the Saudi-backed faction, and that's what it is. And the United States finds itself very much in the Saudi camp, mainly for two reasons, mainly because of long-standing alliance, and the other is because ultimately the Saudis support our long-term aims and the Iranians don't in the region, but ultimately it's a local fight between two power blocks in the region.
Bill, how deeply is the United States involved in that war in Yemen?
Oh, it's deeply involved. The military is now announcing when it conducts airstrikes there. There were 4 announced strikes last month, 1 this month. But the U.S. has been conducting drone and conventional airstrikes consistently since 2009. As a matter of fact, the first drone strike the U.S. ever launched killed an Al-Qaeda operative in Yemen in 2002, and then there was a 7-year hiatus. But the U.S. is also providing special operations force support, logistical support, intelligence support, and I'm backing the UAE in its fight against AQAP. So the U.S. is enmeshed in this war
in February,
as part of its effort to wage war against the global jihadists.
In February, there was a meeting between senior administration and senior Emirati officials in which they agreed to focus on a major counterinsurgency anti-AQAP effort in southern Yemen. It's getting going right about now, and you can expect the U.S. to be much more heavily involved in southern Yemen with the Emiratis in this counterinsurgency program that has all the problems we've been talking about this entire program.
William, there are occasional questions being asked in Congress here in Washington about supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia buys billions of dollars worth of weapons from the United States. These weapons are being used in this war in Yemen. In some instances, and we're not sure about this because we can't tell, but the weapons could have been used against civilian targets. A hospital's been bombed, a school's been bombed. When those questions are asked here in Congress, is it just window dressing? Is it just, and not in a wink, and we're going to sell the weapons anyway?
From where I sit anyway, Congress doesn't seem to be really willing to do anything about this. They simply tolerate everything that's being done. I mean, they're not standing up. They have a responsibility here that they should live up to, but they're not doing that. I mean, I think the administration is also being turned by interests in the military. I still say the military-industrial complex has a lot of money to be made here. If these conflicts continue, they make a lot of money from both sides, if you will. They can supply weapons like supplying weapons out of Libya to the rebels in Syria, through Turkey. All of that ends up, we have to fight that too, so that's more money and more weapons, more military-industrial complex profits. And we don't have anybody looking into this or trying to put a strategy together for our government as a whole, trying to pull the whole region together to get it to work, to solve these issues, to try to stabilize the region. We're not doing that. And that's because Congress and others are abdicating their responsibilities.
Okay, well, let's look to the future. Let's go to Bill. Bill, do you expect anything to change after the elections in November, presidential, the new president will be here?
I don't see much changing. I think the U.S. Look, to me, the real fight that has yet to been fought is that ideological struggle that needs to happen. It's a war within Islam. More Muslims are killed in this war by jihadists than anyone. And what the U.S. and the West should be doing is supporting those on the right side. We're not doing that effectively. And we're unwilling to really we're calling this a war against violent extremists and whatnot. And, you know, if there's anything that Trump's, to me, in my opinion, he's going to go far on the other side and alienate any groups that we could work with in the Muslim community. And I think Clinton, you'll probably just get sort of Obama medium. You know, she'll be a little more heavy-handed with her military action. But I really don't see, nothing is really going to change, because I think no matter who's elected, you're going to continue to get bad policy.
Do you agree that under President Clinton? I pretty much
agree with everything Bill said, yeah.
Hussein, what's your view?
Hard to disagree with it. I mean, I don't think we know what to expect from Donald Trump, except that he seems an empty vessel. Therefore, he would probably just replicate a kind of a familiar Republican foreign policy approach. And I agree with Clinton. You're going to get Obama less light a little bit, but something really very similar. So yeah, I think there isn't anything in the political debate that points to a better policy, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Well, that's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter. We're at CCTV_America. We also use Facebook. Find us at facebook.com/CCTV America. I'm Arund Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.